really looking forward to our time learning together. JPro Network is the organization that is by, of, and for the approximately 80,000 people who power Jewish community organizations across the United States and Canada. Before we turn it over to our teacher, I'd like to just mention a couple of other things that are on the go here at JPro. Beginning next week, we are offering a weekly peer discussion group for anyone who has been experiencing layoff or furloughs at this time. We also have opened up Well Advised, our free 1-hour advising session, to anybody who works or has worked at a Jewish community organization. Sessions can be requested online, and thank you to my colleague Erica, who is chatting out the links to all of these things as I speak. We have an ongoing Jewish meditation series that is offered on Tuesday evenings and Thursday mornings that will continue throughout the month of June. These sessions are drop-in, so you should feel free to register at any time for the next sessions, even if you haven't yet participated. Next week, we're also partnering with One Table for a JPro online session called Sacred Self-Care, Shabbat as Wellness Practice for Jewish Community Professionals. More information on that and to register can be found on our website. And lastly, there are a few more spots available for our most popular masterclass, Task Management with Less Stress with Diana Bloom. The class begins on June 16th. We hope that you'll join us for as many of these programs as you would like. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome our teacher for the hour, Dr. Erica Brown.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. It's such a real delight to see everyone's faces. You know, I actually, I've been thinking a lot about Ruth and her face, and I want to, this is just a beautiful, beautiful scene in chapter 2 of the Book of Ruth, where Ruth prostrates herself and when Boaz extends kindness to her, and he kind of recognizes her, all that she's done, in a way, making eye contact, you know, lifting her face. And so, although there are many things I miss about being in a classroom, one thing I treasure about online teaching is the capacity to see everyone's face. It's just such a beautiful, sacred gift. So thank you. So what I want to talk about today and look at some sources in preparation for Shavuot, but in some way also as a response to the strain that we've been experiencing, is the changing nature of friendship. So, and in particular, thinking a little bit about professional friendships. So some people we saw in the office were relatively friendly, and now when we don't see them for months, you know, how does that shift things for us? So I'm going to invite you to drop some thoughts in the chat room about what you think are some of the advantages and some of the challenges of professional friendship. And I'm just going to time you for a minute, just to get a sense, a little bit of, just to put some kind of thoughts, and I'm going to put my own in the chat room. So again, challenges of professional friendships, and also the gift of professional friendships. Okay, so I'm enjoying reading this. The collaboration across communities, keeping some of the challenges of keeping work boundaries, someone to bounce off ideas, able to feel your whole self, even at work, support, Question, how much sharing is too much sharing? Oversharing. So that seems to be a theme here. The idea of lifting people up, supporting someone, understands your specific challenges, the struggling to find the boundaries of what conversations are okay. Leaving a job feels like leaving a friend. So lots of really beautiful and thoughtful responses. I think, I remember when my dad, before he retired, he worked for organizations for a really, really long time. And, that there was the gold watch gift at the end. And I remember being on a management team in one of the Jewish nonprofits I worked for, where we had actually a pretty harsh conversation around what someone should get from the organization as a farewell party if you've only been there for a year. Does it change if you've been there for 2 years? Does it change if you've been there for 4 years? So talk about leaving an organization, leaving friendships. I think for a lot of people, they are hesitant to invest in people because our jobs feel much more transitory. Anyone want to unmute and speak to that about maybe holding back sometimes in a friendship because of that? Because we're going to talk a little bit about it as it relates to the Book of Ruth. Any thoughts on that? Anyone thinking, I don't care how long I'm here, I am totally in. I am vulnerable. I want to be close to people.
Hi, I'm Cindy.
Hi, Cindy.
How are you?
Great.
I have always worked in schools, not in national organizations. And so within closed ecosystems, so to speak. And that's where my career was. And then I retired from my career, and now I'm working for a national Jewish organization. And I think it's really beautiful at the organization that I work for, how much effort is put into, like everybody has lunch together. The CEO and the bookkeeper, everybody eats lunch at the same time around the same table. And I had never experienced that before. And there's, yet I don't feel that I have friendships there like I've had in all of, my longtime career places. But it's a very positive culture of a very friendly culture. And I've also worked in places that there's very strong friendships, but not such a friendly culture.
Yeah. Okay. So interesting, right? So what we're looking for at work, some people actually hold back a lot because they feel that it might not be safe, that they may share information that may come back to bite them at some point. And I've actually heard HR people HR directors say, work is not for friends. The workplace is not a place to have friends, which always struck me as kind of harsh. One friend of mine says, Erica, I get my love at home. And it's important to me to get my love at home and not feel that work has to provide that for me in case I leave a job, or if people get the wrong impression about how invested I am, the relationship stays somewhat utilitarian. So this question of boundaries and lack of boundaries came up in the chat. Anyone else want to comment on that? Because actually, I think for many of us, I could share myself, the lack of boundary I feel in online teaching. Much as I love seeing everyone's face, I'm not always happy to see everyone's bedroom. I'm just going to be out there about it. And if you didn't make your bed, I'm trying to maintain a positive view of you, but it's hard, I got to admit. So I think actually the blurring of boundaries is happening in interesting ways now, but not necessarily in ways that are generative. So I'm wondering, Cindy, even as you were speaking, are you having online lunches, right? Online, Zoom, online Zoom social aspects of get-togethers, happy hours. How many of you, by show of hands, have had a happy hour with colleagues? Okay, some of you are like, yeah, it's not enough. I need a lot more.
Erica, I have this is Jessica in Cleveland.
Hi.
Hi. One of the things for me that's really interesting is, and I was starting to put it in the chat thing, but it sort of took a little while, is that working in a Jewish setting, Jewish communal setting, I've done this for 30 years. I've worked in Hillel's, I went to Federation now, I worked at the J. It comes like family, it's a very different feel. And my husband his work colleagues are his work colleagues. You know, they talk on the phone, but like it's not, you know. And we're planning a wedding right now. Please God for my daughter.
Oh,
But so it's one of those things where you say, he's like, well, no work people.
Mm.
You know, and that's a really like, I also work at a gift shop. That's easy. Like I can say to the women, look, we're just not having, but like the people who, and in our, I don't know if anybody else sees this, but in our setting, sometimes the way we are with in our world, in a Jewish community, if there's a death in a family, if there's a wedding, if there's a baby born, it's more than just saying my colleague had a death in the family. So I mean, it's going to be kind of easy because there'll be numbers and we'll just figure it out. But like, there is that very different feel for me working in the Jewish community as when I compare it to my husband who works like in sales for a company, like in another city, you know?
Yeah, what the expectations are. I think the expectations actually are very beautiful. They're dialogical. There's a sense of the I-thou relationship that might be different. And then there's always a little skirting of danger, which is, when does it feel like it crosses the line? And I'm not sure I want to know that much about the people that I work with, right? And I think actually it's a great exercise, having made 3 weddings, making that list is a great exercise. I'll tell you what's worse. When you get to the 3rd wedding and you use the same addresses from the 1st wedding, you go, actually, I don't think we're friends with those people anymore. So we can talk about that offline. So what I want to do is explore some of these themes as they appear in the Book of Ruth. Now, the Book of Ruth is not a quote unquote professional text, but I think that there are aspects of professional life there that I think are important. So what I want to do is I'm going to share the screen and take you to, just give me a thumbs up if you can see this on the screen. You can see, okay, great. So, this is a depiction done by Hannah Helen Rosenberg. And I love this depiction because, first of all, there's a circular sense, there's a sense of movement about it. You can see their feet, the sandals of Ruth and Naomi, and I'll give you a little synopsis of the story. But there's also a sense of these 2 women relying on each other. Their hands around each other in a very supportive way. They're obviously grieving together for the losses they've experienced. And I want to talk a little bit about those losses momentarily. There's just a feeling that they're on a road and hope, and the bright colors suggest that there's some optimism, but they've come from a position of grief. And I think that's important. That's important to point out. So we're going to go back to look at some reflective questions. I want to look at some observations on Ruth, on friendship generally. And one of them comes from Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz in his book, Simple Words. He says, what is the essence of friendship? It is the voluntary sharing with another of things that are important for me, whether it's sharing my possessions or my persona, my time or my secrets. In fact, this sharing does not always mean giving, but rather it is the will to allow somebody else to participate in something that is dear to me. And I like this from a professional context also, because sharing takes lots of forms. For some people, friendship is really only meaningful when they can share something that they would not share with others, right? The vulnerability of sharing secrets. And I can say for myself, in terms of my close friends, if I share with you, but you don't share with me, our friendship is not going to deepen. At work, that's always a little uncomfortable. It's almost like we're peeling off the layers. Sometimes it takes a number of years. Sometimes it takes building certain memories together. Sometimes it takes going through something very difficult. That might be a furlough. That might be, as many people are experiencing now, that might be a crisis at work. I could share with you, and I share it sadly, but a 26-year-old, very beloved colleague of mine in the Federation of Greater Washington took his life. That was an event that created a bond with my colleagues that I mean, God forbid it should be replicated in any other setting, but suddenly saw the humanity of people, their capacity for grief, and that brought people together in very interesting ways. But what's interesting here is it's not only about secrets and vulnerability. It might be sharing possessions. I'm going to say sharing programs, sharing creative ideas, and sharing time, giving people time that's above and beyond in certain ways what you technically needed to give them, but something that you wanted to give them by virtue of creating a bond in a workplace that you otherwise wouldn't have. So in the Book of Ruth, this comes out in a really interesting way. Actually, I just want to comment on Dana's beautiful comment in the chat that I want to share. My dad was really sick a few years back and got a life-saving transplant. I had a hard time because many of my coworkers are so close to me, and they often asked how I guess I'm doing. I felt like I had a lot of aunts at work, which I appreciated, but it got exhausting to tell my story and have people always checking in on me. So don't worry about the typos. We appreciate the sentiment. So that's an interesting question also, when there's some blurring of boundaries. On the one hand, there's support. On the other hand, it's somewhat exhausting keeping everybody on the same page. Now there's certain caring networks online that allow you to do that to a certain degree, although it feels a little less personal. Sometimes you can get that gift because a colleague helps you manage, quote unquote, the communication. So let's look at the Book of Ruth, and I want to look at one particular scene, and I want to create the narrative texture for you. I'll just start with the beginning verse, and just wanted to read this verse in Hebrew for a moment. Vahi bimei shvot hashoftim, vahi ra'av ba'aretz, vayelech ish mebeit lechem Yehuda, lagor b'snei Moab, hu v'ishto shnei banav. The Book of Ruth is only 4 chapters. It's a very tightly constructed book, and it begins with a beautiful introduction, or let's say at least a telling and informative introduction. In the days when the judges judged, which gives you a sense of the book of Judges, which is after the book of Joshua, which is after the 5 books of Moses. So we're early on in our biblical story. And there was a famine in the land, and a man from the house of bread. And I want to translate that quite literally. Beit Lechem, Bethlehem, literally means the house of bread. So if there's a famine in the house of bread, things must be really going wrong. They go to the plains of Moab. The plains suggest, for those of you who've been in the Bethlehem environs, it's very rocky there. So going to a place which is fields, which have fields, means that they're leaving a place of drought. They're leaving a place where things don't grow to a place where they hope things will grow. Another biblical piece of information that's important and that sets, I think, the irony for the text is that Moab, the land of Moab, was a place that denied us food when we were passing through in our wilderness years, that we approached them with the request for food. So there's, of course, an irony that you're going from the house of bread, a small nuclear family, a husband, a wife, 2 sons, moving from one place to the next in search of food. There's another dimension here that's important to mention, and I think it actually speaks perhaps to some of the professional experiences some of us are having. It was in the time of the Judges. The Judges was a time when there was very poor leadership, and often a change of leadership, and sometimes an urgent change of leadership. So there's, when you look at all these factors, that leads a person to say, it's time for me to change my life. I can't stay here anymore. You can see all of these precipitating factors. And I mention that because just to get back to now I'm back with you all. Hold on. My gallery view. So now you can't text anymore because I could see you. But what I want to think about with you is all of these precipitating factors lead someone to leave their friendship base, right? There's a drought, and I want to compare the drought to a furlough. Right, there are a lot of us who are worried. I've had this experience in my own family. My daughter-in-law was recently furloughed. It's a very devastating experience, and not only from the financial part of it, but it's also losing a community that you were trying to build, that you invested a lot of energy in, that now is no longer there. So we understand that people leave our lives, or they leave our professional networks because there's a drought. Or to speak to the time of Judges, it's heavily political. Sometimes very heavily political environments are environments that become toxic where you simply feel like, I can't spend any more time here. This is not healthy for me. Missy Goldstein says, I've had that experience on the other side. I know the colleague is going through a difficult time with the family member's health. I want to ask and show I care. I'm thinking about them and I don't want to be intrusive. It's a hard line to balance, right? So that question of what can I do for you? For those of you who haven't read, Letty Pogrebin wrote a book, What to Do, How to Be a Friend to a Friend Who's Sick. And I thought it was really instructive. So that might be something that you want to read about helping friends go through a crisis and get the time and support they need. But there's lots of reasons that create the kind of environment where a family moves from one place to another. And in particular, when this family does move to Moab, which is not friendly territory, Naomi's husband dies. She has sons who marry Moabite women. Perhaps they didn't intend to stay that long for their children to grow up and to marry. They're married for about 10 years. Rabbinic tradition is that they had no children. And their names are Machlon and Chilion, which is the equivalent of going to a Brit, going to a circumcision, and you wait for the names of twins, and it is death and destruction, right? And you're going, not loving that name. What's the middle name? So the idea of giving these children these names, obviously the editor has superimposed, if you like, a judgment on these characters, that these people left a community in need and they came back when they were in need. I say that because I want to draw for you what I think is a really important visual image of what happens to Naomi. She leaves her country, she leaves her city, she moves to a foreign territory. Her husband dies. Then her children marry Moabite women. And then she loses her children, right? Her sons die. So if we're looking at this as an inverted pyramid, this is a life that has severely narrowed in a few years. She has given up her friend community. And when she comes back, she's going to be greeted with this. And I just drop for me in the chat how you read this. Hazot Naomi. I read it in a particular way for you. Is this Naomi? Right? She comes back after perhaps 10 years of not being somewhere. Is this Naomi? What's going on there? And you can unmute, tell me what you think. Is this Naomi? Dan?
I think that's the idea that you're not the person you used to be. I'm reminded when my dad had been very sick for many years and unfortunately passed away, but many years after he initially became ill, and the rabbi who eulogized him said he was determined not to be the guy who used to be the guy, meaning he didn't want to be known as, is this Naomi? Is that the same person? He reinvented himself in those 8 years.
Yeah. How lovely. How lovely.
I think in the time of now, if we compare it to now, I mean, people look, you haven't seen, well, sort of a little bit what you were saying, you see things about them, you're like, is this that person like that I thought, and also like my friends whose hair is turning gray, there's people who put on weight, like, is this the person that was 9 weeks ago sitting next to me and sharing in my travails and my successes? Like, is this that same person, or is this the real person? A little confusing.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. Just the physical change of people. I was on a work call this morning, and I just in a private chat, I'm like, "You look like Elvis." People kind of look differently, but they've also undergone this experience in very different ways, right? They're processing this, and for some people, there are very few silver linings, right? And so to Dan's important point about, I don't want to be the one who has changed. Naomi basically says, I'm not Naomi. I'm actually Mara. Call me bitter, because if you call me bitter, you're punishing me by saying, oh, is this Naomi? You know how it is with a friend, you come back to us when you're in need, but you leave us when we're in need. And it's her way of saying, life has punished me enough. You don't need to add an additional layer of punishment to that. And to that, just to add, I think there's something in the snark of this comment, right? Whether they're saying, is this you coming back? Is this you with the Moabite woman? They don't even acknowledge this outsider who in many ways is the ultimate insider, because she makes this huge commitment to Naomi, to Naomi's God, to Naomi's people, to Naomi's land. I actually think of this expression. Tom Wolfe wrote in one of his books about women looking each other over at a party. They looked each other over with microscopic carelessness. Microscopic carelessness. And I love that expression. And to me, it encapsulates a lot of workplace gossip, right? Looking each other over with microscopic carelessness, right? You kind of pretend that you don't care, but you're deeply invested. And sometimes you make comments that can be alienating. Oh, who's this? You know, think of things that might come up at a staff meeting, or I often call them the closed door conversation, where your door is closed and other people watch you going in the room with someone. The other thing that makes me think of this expression is when people in a meeting who are friendly across a room make eye contact. I used to be in certain meetings with eye rollers, right? You kind of knew what impression they had of what was going on because they were always eye rolling towards each other. And I once actually said, you know, I think other people might feel uncomfortable when you do that. I don't know what you're talking about. So there's ways in which we alienate people, and the experience of alienation is something that Naomi is going to go through, and Ruth will go through in her own way. And I want to get back.
Can I
Please.
offer one other reading
so
of it?
Nice to see you, Alicia. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I think in a way this reaction also is a little bit of a gift as much as it's snark. Because so often when we go back home, for those of us who have our childhood communities to go back to, people treat us like we're exactly the same as when we grew up. And that can feel like hard to come out as who you really are if you have changed. Presumably we've all changed somewhat. Yeah. And it can be hard to say, actually, I'm different now. And I feel like this is a gift in some way because it gives her the entree to say, you're right, I'm different. I'm Maran now. Don't think of me as the old Naomi. As much as there's like the hurt there, there's also the door opening for her to define herself.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful, beautiful and helpful observation. It almost makes me wish we could give ourselves different names when we walk into different situations, right? To be able to say, you know, that was me, but I'm no longer, you know, I'm no longer that person. Unfortunately,
and I think that happens at work also. If you were in a workplace for a long time and you go through some kind of transformation, it could be hard to share that with colleagues about how you want to be seen differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you're in a caretaking position, or you change organizations, but somehow, you know, the Jewish community is relatively small, right? So we try to repurpose ourselves or re-envision ourselves, and other people lock us in. I think the issue with Naomi, and something to bear in mind, is when you're cognizant of your own bitterness, right? You're cognizant and you can name your bitterness. It's helpful for others to know how to treat you, but you also sometimes can get mired down in the Debbie Downer, right? And this is after Ruth makes this amazing speech. And I want to look at that speech, and then I want to turn with you, with your permission, to look at something remarkable that Maimonides has to say. So we're going back to our, hold on. Okay, so she says, when Ruth and Naomi and Orpah are setting back to Bethlehem, Yehuda, they follow an ancient practice, which is the accompaniment of a guest. We have this in the Abrahamic tradition, that in Jewish law, we're supposed to walk a guest out 4 amot, 4 cubits, which is unusually the equivalent of 6 feet. So Judaism has a history of social distancing. The idea of, but for us, it's not really social distancing. It's really being in the personal space of someone. So we walk someone out the door. And so Orpah and Ruth walk their mother-in-law out. She's ready to go back after all of this loss, this inverted pyramid of loss. She's ready to rebuild whatever shards of life she has coming to her in her perception. And Ruth, basically, Orpah kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. Ruth davkaba, she clings to her. There are people who believe that she was too clingy. And she says, don't urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. Wherever you go, I'll go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. And I've seen this on wedding invitations. Where you die, I die, and there I'll be buried. Thus and more may God do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. So it's this beautiful speech to someone who has lost everything, as a way of saying, but you haven't lost me. But let's see Naomi's response to this, because, which I've highlighted here, because it's actually a very hard response. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. You might say, if your mother-in-law ceases to argue with you, that you have achieved something. But I just want to ask us to actually think about what it means to tell someone that you really care for them and have them say nothing. Right? And I think all of us, when we're building new relationships, when we're building romantic relationships, there comes a point when you have to say, I blank you, right? And I'm just interested to hear from any of you, what gets you from one level of relationship to the next level of relationship in a professional setting? What is it for you that takes you from one to the next? What do you have to do? Speak up, speak up. I want your wisdom. Okay, total trust. That might be a little hard to get, right? But you know, a sense of trust.
Most trust.
Okay, Erin says finding a point of connection.
I think one thing you could do is just ask somebody if they want to go to an event after work. You know, like maybe it's trivia, maybe it's dinner, just something very simple. I feel like that's a good icebreaker to improve that relationship.
Yeah, and it always feels a little risky, right, Jessica? Like I feel like you think, oh, look, and if they say no just for any reason, not having to do with you, you might personalize it. I always think there's like this vulnerable moment in a relationship where you take this risk and you see, you know, will this turn into something else, right? So do you want to go out to dinner? Do you want to go to a movie? I would take any of those options right now. But, you know, do you want to do something and see, is there some interest? Let's see what other people have dropped into the chat. Some kind of two-way share, a mutual respect, or the acceptance of difference. I actually find that if someone is able to support you in a setting, in a collegial setting where you might be putting forward an idea and someone says, I really love that idea, I want to talk to you about it afterwards, that's a real relationship builder. Naomi says, many of my professional friends have been strengthened by work travel, opportunities to be away from home together, right? Go on retreats together, perhaps there's a conference. I'm actually not convinced that we at work spend enough time or the structures are sufficient enough for us to really get to know each other that way. And that trust building is so critical for idea sharing, because I think people will take more risks in sharing ideas if they feel they're in a safe and loving environment. So for all the talk that we give about innovation, I think we need to do a lot more to deepen relationships so that innovation comes out of a place of safety. So when Naomi doesn't respond, and she doesn't say, I love you back, right? And it's got to be hard when no one says, I love you back. That's what I want to think with you about, is what motivates Naomi's reticence. Why? And it's valid. It is valid to say, I'm not ready right now for a deeper relationship. Help me understand what you think, why you think Naomi doesn't say, I love you too. Or, great, I'm so glad you're joining me for the rest of this journey. What do you think?
I kind of get the impression that that she's not necessarily happy. She's just resigned. Not in a bad way, but in the sense that, like, especially some people, when they're depressed or just in general, like struggling in a situation, like they don't have the energy to deal with much of anything. And it feels to me like this is that kind of situation. Like she's just going with the flow and not putting up too much of a fight where she can't, and just, all right, this is what's happening, I guess.
Yeah. So to add to that insight, Haley, if you're looking, the New York Times published a very funny but very telling short piece on why I'm not calling you back right now, right? And there have been a number of pieces of people saying, I just don't have a lot of human bandwidth right now. I don't really want to talk about what's going wrong. I feel that I'm on the precipice of depression, and I'm not really up for sharing right now, right? So I think that I appreciated a humorous treatment of it, but I think it was unearthing a lot of deep truths about the way that people are responding now. Sherry says, a love for her daughter-in-law would have been easier for Naomi to stay behind. Robin says it's her deceased son's wife and she's a Moabite. You can see Naomi, as it is, Naomi's going back, perhaps this walk of shame for her. And now she's added to the walk of shame where she's taking some foreign woman in with her who does not even get mentioned. They don't say, oh, is that Naomi and who's with you? She becomes totally invisible. You know, I as someone who often works with converts, and it's such a privilege to be on that very sacred, very difficult journey, the sense that someone has embraced Judaism, made huge sacrifices, and then goes to a synagogue and someone says, oh, that's the convert, right? And you're going, please, there has to be a more inclusive way. So I think for Naomi, that certainly may be going on. I think, and I'll just say this from my own experience with my grandparents who are Holocaust survivors, they really had very, very few friends. They trusted very few people. And there was a way of saying that if you went through my experience, I didn't want a reminder of it. And if you didn't go through my experience, you'll never understand me. And so when you're thinking about where Naomi is right now, Naomi doesn't have the energy to invest in a person who she might lose because she's lost everything else. So I understand her. And I think that there's a gentleness about the approach of friendship to transition to a professional context, is to say, you know what? Not every friendship flies. We can't always, people aren't always ready. When we're ready, someone else may not be ready to take that next step in the relationship. So let's just transition back to our handout, because I told you I wanted to do a piece of, let's just look at Rabbi Steinsaltz again. Although the exchanges in friendship are not measured, friendship is mutual. Friends have to maintain a sense of equity. A parasite isn't a friend. One party can be stronger, or the friends may rely on each other for different things, but there must be a mutuality in the relationship. Friends have to be able to lean on each other, but it also doesn't mean that it's always equal. And it's interesting, the two most famous biblical friendships, Ruth and Naomi, David and Jonathan, are unequal friendships. One is investing a lot more than the other in the relationship. So I want to look at one of the famous statements in our rabbinic tradition about friendship. Joshua ben Prachia says in Ethics of the Fathers, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, right? Acquire in Hebrew, the term kaneh is a transactional term, right? It's like buy yourself a friend, right? Rent a friend. So I want to understand from Maimonides, and you'll excuse me for reading this, but it's really, I think, important. He makes a distinction in three types of friends. So let's get there. Make for yourself a teacher. That is to say, even if he's not suited to be your teacher, put him in the position of being your teacher until it seems to you that he's indeed teaching. Thus you shall acquire wisdom. Learning from another is of different quality from learning on one's own. Learning on one's own is good, but learning from another endures longer, is more clearly understood. This holds true if he's your equal or even your inferior in wisdom. So let's just pause on that for a moment. Making yourself a teacher doesn't mean finding a teacher. It means taking someone who is not technically a teacher. They didn't go to a school of education. They don't have a degree in child psychology, whatever it is. There's someone who has something to teach you that you're not good at. So I want to share with you, I have a brilliant friend who is a professor in Ivy League University. And she once said to me, I love having children. I hate raising children. And I was astounded. And what she shared with me, someone who, no problem in SATs, straight A student, there were things she understood how to do, but raising children and being in relationships, they're just not on that same achievement scale. In fact, sometimes the people who are really great at that sense of achievement and ambition really doesn't work well when you just got to sit and do nothing with people, right? You just got to be chill and be with them. So I say that because what I saw in her was she reached out to people. She made teachers to help her parent better. Right? Without saying, you are my teacher, or let me, or be my teacher, I can say that my children have been my IT department, certainly working overtime these days. So there are people we make into teachers who aren't technically teachers, and that's how Maimonides understands. Maimonides, the 12th century physician, philosopher, legalist, that's how he understood. Anyone here want to share someone who you made a teacher? Because professionally, we all need them. And I've had so many mentors who have been teachers to me in my own professional trajectory. Anyone either want to share a mentor or share someone who taught you something at work that you're not going to forget? Love a little unmute action. Love it.
So definitely the IT guys, right? Become huge mentors, and they've been amazing with us even remotely. They've been having virtual office hours and stuff like that. It's really helpful. And also I'm in a situation where I was approached recently by a number of women who work in our building who have young children at home. And they said, we're talking among ourselves, we really miss the lunch table, like where we get wisdom from some of the older moms and older dads. And would you be willing to moderate a conversation for us? You know, and I said, I'm a social worker by trade, but not clinical. And I was like, you know, I don't really like kids, right? They're like, no, but you're such a good parent. And I said, okay, be happy to moderate. And you know, it's been really interesting. One of the first things that came up, we started with gratitude and I showed a video, and then we went through some of the things that's hard. And one of the things that a number of these women said, it's a small group, maybe 15, was they're not the mom they thought they'd be. And I had to remind them that they didn't sign up for this kind of momming, right? They're working outside the home. That's what they signed up for. And they have kids under 10, and it's just a different experience. And first of all, I was really touched, right, that they asked me to moderate it. But I put myself in their shoes, you know, like I got through all those young years because I worked all the whole time. Being at home with my kids would have been really, really hard for me. Yeah. So I think it's just an interesting thing in terms of mentorship. Like sometimes you find it in a different place than you expect.
Yeah, people who help you with work-life balance, or people who have, and there are a lot of young, I would say, young parents at work who are afraid to say, I don't know how to work out the work-life balance thing. Now it's come to a head and it's come to extreme. I'll just share with you a moment that I'll never forget. Vicki Marks, who is a wonderful and beloved friend and mentor to me when I was worked at the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. And I remember going in her office, she would always stand up, move around the other side of her desk and say, Erica, how can I help you? And I said, Vicki, you don't have to get up. And I said, I know that you're working. And she said, you are my work. It was, and that little gesture of just moving from one side of the desk to the other was a lesson that I've carried with me for the past 10 years in my, you know, my own work and my own supervision, my own thinking about these things. So I think there's a lot to both learn from colleagues, ask of colleagues, and also give to other colleagues who may be struggling right now. And we might not be reaching out to the people who would pass us in the hall and we don't have a tight relationship with, but they're watching us, they want to learn from us, or vice versa. Reaching out to them now when people have a little bit more time might be a great idea. So I want to keep going in Maimonides, because he talks about friendship, and he says, he notes what we noted before, which is note the language of acquisition, right? Is it buying a friend? It doesn't say make yourself a friend or become friendly with others. The point is the person has to acquire someone who will love him, who will correct his deeds and all of his matters. As the saying goes, either friendship or death. And if he doesn't find a friend, he must persevere with all his heart, even to the point of seducing another person to love him until he wins his love. He shouldn't cease from bowing to his will until his love is strong. As the teachers have said, when you love, do not love on your own terms, but rather on the terms of your beloved. So this is, to me, so powerful, which is you can't love on your own terms in friendship. You have to love on the terms of the one of the other. And this idea of friendship or death, oi charuta, oi mituta, really is bearing in mind 2,000 years ago, something that we know in modern psychology, the importance of weak ties, the importance of strong ties, that people who live in great loneliness can suffer depression to a much greater extent. This idea of really working hard at friendship. Acquiring a friend means working hard at understanding what someone else needs, persevering in all your heart. And that's what I think actually Ruth does so poignantly in this text, without the expectation of it being mutual at this point. But Ruth says, I am all in. I am interested in you, in your people, in your country, in your land. I have this deep curiosity for everything about you. I'm loving you on your terms. And then he goes on, as many of you know, Maimonides was an Aristotelian, so he cites Aristotle. When both friends act according to this principle, each seeking to fulfill the will of the other, they share a single intention. A friend is a second self. Here is what I love about Maimonides that has really helped me both in a professional and a non-professional context. He says there are three types of friends: a useful friend, a utilitarian friend, a pleasant friend, and a friend who ethically inspires and instructs. And he says friends are like partners. Theirs is like the friendship between a king and his army, right? So I want to stay on this for a second. We have a lot of people in our lives who are useful friends, right? And I would say colleagues, for the most part, are useful friends. They help us get through the day. I don't know how many of you have carpool friends or had carpool friends when we were driving carpool. For loads of years, I had carpool friends, and I pretty much looked at the world as, do you have a Honda Odyssey 8-seater? If not, I'm really honestly not interested. So there was like a certain utility about it, and we were all using each other for the Honda Odyssey 8-seater. So it was okay. And this is, I think, his description is really what we call weak ties, right? The kindness that we have among people. One of the things that appeals to me when I'm in a store and I'll repeat business is if someone takes the time to read my name from a credit card, right? And they greet me by name when I go into a store, I'll pay more for that experience because that weak tie is important to me. And then if I say, well, do you have such and such in stock? It's good for them and it's good for me because we're developing something and we're useful towards each other. The old king and the army. So let's go back to the second level of friendship. There are two kinds of pleasant friends: the delightful friend and the trusted friend. The love of men for women is characteristic of the relationship with a delightful friend. And we can talk offline about Maimonides and men and women in the Platonic era and his medieval notions of friendship between men and women. But he says a trusted friend inspires full confidence so that you feel it's unnecessary to be reserved with him in action or in speech. To Dan's point about total trust, this idea of pleasant friends. There are two types of pleasant, which I'm really intrigued by. Someone who's delightful. There's a lot of delightful people that we might not be deep friends with, but we appreciate their sense of humor. We get in an elevator with them and they make us smile. And there's just something about that person. And pleasantry can be on that superficial, charming but valid, right? You can have something that feels, it's not deep, but it's lovely. And that's delightful. And then there's trusted friends. And those are so critical at work. Someone who you can speak with in full confidence. You're having difficulty with your supervisor, your boss, and you don't feel necessary to be reserved. You can speak your heart, reveal all your concerns, the good and the ugly, without fear that you'll be hurt either by him or anyone else. When one achieves this level of confidence in another person, he will discover deep pleasure in speaking with him and loving him. So this idea of feeling trust as deep and embracing. Now, for some people, for example, for Cicero, the Roman statesman, believed that this level of confidentiality was the highest level of friendship. But for Maimonides, it's not. So strap in, we're going to his last definition. When both friends yearn for and are directed towards one goal, namely the good, they are to each other, I'll have to fix that a little, they are to each other ethically inspiring friends. Each one will want to be helped by his friend in achieving that good for both of them together. And this is the kind of friend that we're commanded to acquire. This kind of friendship is similar to the friendship that a teacher feels for a student and a student feels for a teacher. Okay, so Maimonides is actually given us a very different picture right now of what it means to acquire a friend. When it comes to useful friends, you don't acquire them. They need you, you need them. It happens. When it comes to pleasant friends, people who are pleasant, there's no acquisition there. When it comes to vulnerability, if you can be vulnerable and I can be vulnerable, not so much work that we have to do. But Maimonides says there are actually people who are outside of our ethical bar, right? They are a stretch for us. There are aspirational friends. They're people who, because by virtue of who they are and what they do, and that might be someone who is in the C-suite, that might be a professor, that might be like a rabbi. And there's someone who just feels out of our league. And Maimonides says, those are the people who make us better. So he says, you have to acquire those people. They don't come naturally. They're not within our social circles. You have to work really hard to get them, but they're the ones who ultimately change you the most. So when I speak, if I have something maybe not so complimentary to say, and I go to my trusted friend who's in the office next door, and I say, did you see what so-and-so did? Or I tell my boss something, I tell someone about my boss because I'm venting, and I think venting is good for me. And the other person says, yeah, the boss always does that, right? And we go on a little natter about that, and we both feel better and validated. But in some way, it might have actually expanded our problem because someone else has just fed into the natural negative feelings we feel. But then you go to that ethically inspiring friend and you say, I'm having difficulty with my boss. And that person says, let's just look at your boss's point of view. Maybe this is what was going on. And we leave thinking, I've got some work to do on myself. I've got some work to do on the relationship. This person stretched me and gave me a different perspective and said, don't be your worst self. I want you to be your best self. And Maimonides believed that those are the most important and critical type of friends that we have. So I'd just like to take a moment to hear some thoughts about acquiring this kind of person. If you've made such an acquisition, if you're thinking about that, or what you could do to develop that kind of relationship with someone you look up to. Interesting to hear what you. Thoughts on the highest level of friendship. Cindy, what do you got for me?
I have this funny recollection of the dynamic between my mother and her sister, who were always at it, but the closest of close. And my aunt having a daughter who is the same age as me. So this foursome, right? And my cousin always saying to me, Cindy, when are you going to ever learn when it's appropriate to say, yeah, he's a jerk, instead of saying, well, I wonder what he was thinking. The rest of us don't appreciate you're going to that place.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't appreciate going to that place, and yet at the same time, we can make problems bigger, right? You know, we can make that molehill into a mountain when we talk to people who are echo chambers of where we are emotionally. So I think Maimonides says, you know, and he's not saying that you've got to have like the morality police over your shoulder all the time, but I think there is a feeling. I definitely have friends. And I feel that I'm a better person when I'm in their presence, because they set a high bar, because I think they're thoughtful and they challenge me in a different way. I think that I want to share with you some of the questions that I had asked, reflective questions before this, because I think one of them is particularly important when you think about professional friendships. So I asked, what do you look for in a friend at work? How have your notions of friendship changed as you've gotten older? If you've lost a professional friend, what was the reason for the breakup? And I think sometimes the breakup of professional friends happens because you need someone to be a more ethically inspiring friend than they are. They brought you down. They created an environment that was initially felt very vulnerable, but then it felt gossipy. And you're saying, gosh, when they closed the door, are they talking about me the way that I was talking with them about someone else just a few minutes ago? So I think there are environments which feel toxic. And then there's this question of letting go sometimes of someone who's a colleague and distancing ourselves. Anyone want to speak to that? I'd be really interested in your thoughts. Obviously without names and email addresses, but, and it may be from a previous work. Raya, do you want to share something? You look like you've got just something on you have to unmute.
It really depends on how big your school is or community, or how many people teach in your school. You may resent some of them, but you can't say much because it will somehow, or you may love somebody, the other person would not accept it. It really depends on how big our stuff is. I come from a very small staff. I teach in Agora. We have 4 teachers. If I will resent 2 of them, I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to take into consideration how many will get offended by it. By the way, I would like to go back to something you said before. You said about inequality between Naomi and Ruth, because one is a daughter and one is a mom, a mother-in-law, and then you mentioned David and Jonathan. It's the same DNA. David and Naomi have the same DNA. They actually have the same way of acting.
Right. And yes, it's a beautiful observation. Actually, the way I see it is that Naomi is for Ruth this ethically inspiring friend. And so she's willing to do things that aren't necessarily reciprocal. I don't expect the professor that I really look up to in graduate school to invest as much time in me as I'm investing in the professor. But I do expect that in some way that professor will help lift me in knowledge or in some other way closer to my goal for myself in terms of achieving a particular trajectory. And I really appreciate what you said. When a staff is small and you don't have choices, you really, in some ways, you really have to do the acquisition work, right? You have to find what you like about the other person. I will share this this incident with you. When I was doing my doctorate, I had a member of my committee who was very, very difficult. And I was working with a coach in a professional context. Some of you may work with coaches who I think are an interesting kind of professional friend in terms of how they help us. And one of my woes was it was taking me so long to finish my doctorate. And so in her investigation of what was the holdup, I had mentioned this relationship. And she says, well, he knows that you don't like him. I said, oh, no, I'm the best actress in the world. He couldn't possibly. But of course, I was not the best actress in the world. That is not what I do for a living. And in fact, she said to me, what do you like about him? And I really struggled. As someone who likes most people, in fact, I would say loves most people, this person was an extremely arrogant, very difficult, very egomaniacal person. And it was really hard for me. And she goes, we're just going to sit here until you tell me what you like about this person. I was like, this is torture. And like, we're sitting in silence. And slowly I said, well, I really respect this about him. And she said, tell me more. I was like, you got to be kidding, right? Like, I gave you what I got. But she kept pulling and pulling and pulling. And eventually what happened was she said, let that show. Let that show. Once you let that show, things will be different. And it was really an act of trust on my part. But I will say that within 6 months, I had my doctorate. Yes. And I give her a huge amount of credit because I kept thinking in an academic, like, what else do I need to do? And not always in terms of building relationships. We sometimes think that people haven't figured out that we don't like them. Oh, they figured it out, right? And you don't have to say anything, right? There's a lot of body language in that. So maybe acquiring professional colleagues might be not on the scale of find the best mentor, but it may be saying, I actually need to work on myself because there's people at work I don't like and it's getting in the way. And maybe I haven't done enough personal work. I may have tried a lot, but maybe I haven't tried every strategy. Jessica says sometimes it's great to do those personality tests with your team and learn about each other. Alicia says I can get hung up on wanting to be like. I've had 2 colleagues over the 6 years who've been chilly with me, and I took it personally until I have more time with them to get to learn that it was their personality. Right? People aren't always like us. And I appreciate Alicia that comment because it's not easy to write that. A lot of times I'll say to someone, go out to coffee with that person. Like, oh, I couldn't do that. Like, we don't have a good relationship. I'm like, not yet. But, sometimes it takes that gesture to really, to mine it. And I just to go back to Ruth and Naomi in these closing moments. Oh, before I say that, I'd like to invite all of you to join me. Next week, I'll be doing a class, The People and the Book for Jewish Communal Professionals, on reading interpretation and why ancient texts matter. So, and Laura's kindly going to give you the information. If you'd like to join me, it's 12 to 1. So I'm feeding you lunch. It's a lunch and learn. I'll take care of the maybe the content piece of it with your help, and you can provide the physical nourishment. But I'd love for you to join me. Just to conclude and to thank JPro again, because I think one of the things that JPro has done so successfully is it's helped us become friends. Right? It's helped us build bridges with each other that go beyond how to get the work done, but how to get the work done in a maximalist way with colleagues we deeply respect because we've studied with them, because we've gone to workshops with them, because we've gone to conferences with them. So I think in terms of the ethically inspiring friends and helping us acquire them, JPro gets 2 thumbs up, and I'm very appreciative. But I want to go back to Ruth and Naomi and think a little bit about what Shavuot is. Shavuot is not only the time where we celebrate the Torah, because we read the Book of Ruth, which is really in many ways, it's not an intellectual book. It's about kindness, it's about love, and it's in some way a contrast to the intellectual orientation that Shavuot has. So I just want to suggest as a maybe for those of you who are thinking about what you want to study on Shavuot, maybe getting some source sheets, think about writing a few thank you notes to professional colleagues who have made you who you are. Think about arranging a half-hour happy hour with someone, a younger colleague who is not within maybe your professional social circle, but really wishes for a little time with you. What Jessica gave us an example of kind of, throwing out there, I'm happy, I'm going to do an open session on some work-life balance issues or whatever it is. If it's parenting, if it's hobbying, there are people here, there are people who are really struggling right now. And I think telling them how much they mean to us in a professional context can make the difference, can really make the difference in someone's day and maybe in someone's Shavuot. So Shavuot becomes a great time to thank people for being friends. It's also a good time to think about who the ethically inspiring people are we'd like to have. Every year on Rosh Hashanah, actually on Yom Kippur, we do a little worksheet in the meal before Yom Kippur with my family. And one of them is describe someone new who's come into your life, who's added meaning. And I'm proud to say that every year I have a new answer to that question. And every year it's almost always someone from work who that relationship opened up a little and then opened up a lot and then became very treasured for me. So thank you for spending this beautiful hour together. Thanks, JPro. Look forward to seeing some of you.
Can I just say something?
Please, Raya.
Yes, please. Remember that Ruth, the Book of Ruth is also about the first mitzvah of gleaning and giving to the poor without shaming them. This is one of the best part of the Book of Ruth, which I love. It's about anva. It's about being kind without.
Yeah.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and your take on your own personal ethics and your take on friendship. I know that it has enhanced my understanding of the Book of Ruth, and I hope that it has for everybody else. So thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.